Hello, everyone. I'm Sanjana Pandit, and welcome to Infusions of Art, a mini-series dedicated to spotlighting some of Houston Methodist Hospital's renowned physician artists and artist caregivers. For our first episode, we will be hearing from Dr. Richard Fish. Dr. Fish is a native Houstonian and board-certified medical and surgical retina specialist. After graduating summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Texas at Austin, go Longhorns, Dr. Fish received his medical degree from and performed his internship at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. Dr. Fish was also an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas for 2.5 years prior to moving back to his hometown to join Retina Consultants of Texas. At Houston Methodist, Dr. Fish lectures regularly on eye diseases of visual artists and blind musicians. He's the author of a comprehensive book on the medical, musical, and historical aspects of the latter subject, titled The Blind Musician. In his spare time, Dr. Fish enjoys photography, cooking, and is a very active musician. He plays drums in the University of Texas Longhorn Alumni Band, 2 physician rock and roll bands, and several jazz bands. So, without further ado, welcome, Dr. Fish, and thank you so much for being here with us today. I think to start, can you tell us about what age you became interested in drums? Like, what drew you to the drums in particular?
At my elementary school, there was a presentation made, and everybody got to hear about, you're going to be now in what we call at the time junior high. Junior high kids in my district were in sort of forced. There was compulsory music education. So you could pick orchestra, band, choir, but you had to take some kind of music thing. It was wonderful. I said, I think I'd like to play clarinet. And so I started out 6th grade, had a clarinet. It just became evident that that was not going to work out. And so I sort of looked around at what else I might do, and drums just seemed pretty cool. A good friend of mine was playing drums, like, drums, okay, I'll play drums. And so it was rather serendipitous how I, came to be a drummer. I love playing in rock and roll bands. Those types of bands typically get hired more, and so it's lovely to have the occasional gig playing a wedding or some kind of thing where there's a large variety of, mostly popular and rock and roll or R&B kind of things. As a drummer, I much prefer, and I find it way more challenging to play jazz. And so if someone said, well, what kind of drummer are you? The first thing that kind of comes to mind is I would rather be known as a jazz drummer just because it's so challenging to be good at, as opposed to rock and roll, which is great fun, but not as challenging to be proficient at. I'm starting to take, as an adult, starting to take piano and bass and guitar lessons because I've been a drummer all my life and really kind of ignored all these other instruments. So the challenge of my late career, and as I phase into someday retiring, it'll be, well, I'm just a full-time piano playing, bass playing, drumming kind of guy. So that's the plan. When we are young, when people are your age, there's this certain neuroplasticity, and I talk about neuroplasticity a lot in my book about blind musicians, but the ability of the brain to just learn stuff, rewire, all of that is just way easier. Kids, if you teach them 2 languages, they can probably learn 6.
Well, you make it look so easy, Dr. Fish. I mean, it's incredible. What's the number one benefit you see from combining music with your practice of medicine? There
was a time when I played in a band called Double Vision, and that had, amongst its personnel, it had 2 other ophthalmologists. So we were 3 ophthalmologists, and there was a neurologist also in that band. I would refer patients to one of those doctors and tell a patient, and be sure to ask, this doctor about his guitar playing, because I play in a band with him. And just something about the collegiality of a medical colleague also being a colleague, a bandmate, was just a lovely feeling of collegiality amongst the band that extended occasionally into our professional referrals and whatnot.
I mean, if you had, $1 worth of time in an ideal week, how much would you spend, practicing the drums, practicing the piano? How much time would you spend on music? But in reality, what's the actual amount of time you spend on medicine and instruments?
That's an interesting question. It's a really good question because it really, for me, and I would assume this is the case with most physicians who play an instrument, or even if they're a golfer or whatever. Everything kind of depends on the phase of your career that you are at. When you are a young, intern resident, practicing physician, you're trying to complete your training, and there's long hours. You're in practice. You're trying to develop a practice, court referrals. Really work on your craft. Those hours fill your week as a young, physician in training, as a young practitioner. And in my case, there was a very, very long period where if I played a little bit of guitar, that was it. I didn't even play drums. There was a very dormant period for 20 plus years. As your career matures, as your kids mature, and as they're, carpooling and other sorts of extracurricular things, particularly when they start driving and, they get a little bit launched, you find yourself with, okay, I have a few more hours. There became more and more hours available to pick up drums where I hadn't. If I were to give advice to anyone who is starting their career in medicine, the piece of advice I would give would be something like, even if you just find 5 minutes a week, 10 minutes to just, play your instrument, rehearse, to someday be able to say that I have worked on my proficiency, even, uninterrupted, even if there were just little teeny segments, you will find yourself at a later age thanking your younger self for having spent some time. The musician's term is woodshedding.
You've described your fellow physicians as an orchestra, the way everyone plays their different parts according to their strengths and their interests, and the result is sort of that beautiful harmony. So that advice, I think, perfectly summarizes exactly, the life that you've lived and the trajectory that you're going. So I think that's amazing. On a bit of a different direction, if you had not pursued medicine as a career, what alternative career could you have considered?
I thought for a little while about trying to attend what was called North Texas State University, now University of North Texas, which has just a fabulous, world-renowned jazz program. I briefly toyed with that idea. I did, for quite a while, want to be a clinical psychologist. Went into medical school fully intending to be a psychiatrist, and then kind of took a major turn into ophthalmology once I had been exposed to that field and just fell in love with it. So I might have been a psychologist. I don't know that knowing some professional musicians and having played with a bunch of professional musicians, I absolutely admire their dedication to the craft. And could I have, existed and thrived in that world? I don't know. I'm very glad that I now get sort of the best of both worlds of being a physician. Oh, and I get to dabble a little bit in music and not have to make a living as a musician, which is a real, struggle, particularly now, post-pandemic, and how musicians are just not valued. Professional musicians are not compensated or valued.
Given your experience in, the artistic world with instruments, you see the hard work and the dedication it takes to master instruments like this. Yeah, I completely agree. Do you have a favorite quote or saying that sort of captures how you feel about medicine or fine arts or both? Anything that resonates with you?
I don't know that I'm the first person to say this, but some years ago, when playing with a bunch of fellow professional jazz musicians, and they're all talking about, oh, you practice medicine. I said, look, medicine is easy. Jazz is hard. I came across another quote from a drummer and band leader, Art Blakey, who was just fantastic drummer. The Jazz Messengers, were a major force to be reckoned with in the jazz world. And his saying really is just so warm and sublime. He said, music washes away the dust of everyday life. And it's just like, yes.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I'm curious to know, what gave you the idea for The Blind Musician, that novel. I came across that and I was like, this is incredible.
About 15 or 20 years ago, I lost all hearing in my left ear due to a little benign inner ear tumor. And around that time, I just became interested in impairment in artists. So I have a colleague who wrote a wonderful, comprehensive book about the eye diseases of prominent artists. So Monet suffered from terrible cataracts, and Edgar Degas, probably, we don't know what he had, but he had severe vision loss very early in life. And he wrote a magnificent everything that you want to know on visual impairment in visual artists, painters and whatnot. And so later, I sort of began thinking, well, is there a niche for something else? And I mean, it just literally sort of came to me one day that's like, oh, blind musicians. I'll see if there's such a book or such a, kind of a soup to nuts, everything you want to know about blind musicians. And there really wasn't any sort of book. I mean, you could sort of read a biography about Ray Charles or Stevie Wonder. You could read, biographical information. You could read some journal articles and scientific research about what the brain of blind musicians does. And so it just was one of those things that as soon as I discovered that there was sort of a gap, I actually did it kind of more to just learn it on my behalf. Just like, okay, I'd like to know what's going on here. And then the project just kind of got out of control, and I found myself with old-fashioned note cards like we used back in junior high, and taking notes on all these books. And it took the better part of a year to just kind of assemble all of that and then turn it into that little short but pretty comprehensive, everything that you might want to know about the biographies and how does this work, and blind musicians in history, going back all the way to Homer and the epic poets. And anyway, it just turned out way bigger because there was just so little that was written to kind of assemble all those pieces into one kind of comprehensive work.
I can tell how passionate you are about that subject, and you were able to turn it into something for all of us to read and learn more from.
As an ophthalmologist, it was like, okay, I need to understand what did these people have to the best of our ability to assess that, because in particular, history and medical histories in particular get either lost or just distorted, or people don't know. But as an ophthalmologist, like, really, okay, what did Stevie Wonder suffer from that led to blindness? Answer is retinopathy of prematurity. Okay, I understand all about ROP. I can talk about that as an ophthalmologist. And so that was one other little piece that just really kind of sparked my interest in trying to figure out this whole picture. I have explained this to my wife, to my kids, that it's very exacting. It's very intolerant of error. In fact, I was at a baseball game with a friend over the weekend. We saw the Astros, and we were talking about, the best baseball player ever is successful a third of the time. A 333 batting average is destined for the Hall of Fame. And then we got to joking. He's a lawyer, I'm a doctor, and we started joking. Well, so what if a lawyer said, well, I'm successful in a third of my cases? What if a doctor says, yeah, I'm pretty good about a third of the time? I mean, it's a humorous way of looking at the fact that there are some fields that require a level of, as you say, precision that really has to get very, very close to 100%. We can never be totally 100%, but boy, you better be pretty close.
A little birdie told me that you are a big fan of the Beatles. Am I correct in saying that?
I feel very fortunate to have grown up with the Beatles real time, as opposed to my kids' generation or your generation who, may even love the Beatles, but didn't see the world change as the result of the Beatles. So yes, I'm a huge, huge Beatles fan.
Do you have a favorite member?
I admire Paul McCartney as every aspect of his craft. He is just one of the most incredible bass players I've ever heard. An extremely melodic, I mean, groundbreaking bass player. He, of course, is a magnificent composer and arranger of melodies and harmonies. I mean, he is, as a musical, composer, he is literally on the same page as, George and Ira Gershwin, Cole Porter, any famous songwriter of the 20th century. Paul McCartney would have to fit in there. And then, of course, he's just an outstanding performer. So there's a lot to admire. That's not to take away anything else from the other Beatles, but, McCartney just is a titan of music.
Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? You've already given us a piece of awesome advice. You've told us about your life in the artistic world and medical world. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us?
I will, just as a general philosophy of life, might just say something that, kind of reckons back to what I was talking about, a little bit of practice when you're younger. I used to tell my kids when they were in school and even in college, they would feel sometimes a little overwhelmed by a school assignment or something. And I would say, look, kind of start early. And here's the expression, just chip away at it. If you can just chip away at it bit by bit, it will feel less, anxiety provoking. It will feel less large as it looms. You've got a paper out there or whatever. The guy that teaches me now piano and bass has a wonderful saying. He says, how do you eat an elephant? And it's bite by bite, bit by bit. So, chipping away at it, eating an elephant with, bit by bit. I think that's where I would probably land on as a philosophy.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Fish.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you all so much for tuning in for day 1 of Infusions of Art. New episodes will be released every week, and I hope to see you all in the next one. But until then, take care and have a great rest of the day. And let's give one more huge thank you to Dr. Fish.